protection services and laws. He follows Andrew Vax when he considers a mentor and supports the Legislative Drafting Institute for Child Protection. John's writing highlights both the need for better child protection and for reform in the legal system. Please give John Curley a round of applause.
Good afternoon. In case you don't know who I am, my name is Patrick Kilpatrick. I'm an actor.
Patrick Kilpatrick is up next.
I know I look much younger in person than I do in my pictures. Is he here? Well, I guess I'm not Patrick Kilpatrick. I wish I was. I've spent 31 years watching the legal system. You'll notice I don't use the phrase justice system because it's not. Failed children on a regular basis. And what I hope to do with my writing is to give you a good read, I hope, and that it entertains you, and at the same time, perhaps give you a window into something that you might not ordinarily see. What I'd like to do, if it's okay, is read a little bit, and then I'll take some questions. This is the prologue from the book. I need to stop everything and suppress my feelings. I imagine a massive steel door slamming shut. The memories, the tears, the pain, everything other than the task at hand lie behind that door for now. I searched the other bedrooms upstairs. Like the basement door, the attic door was locked. Nothing. It took 10 minutes, yet it felt like 10 years. I reached into my pocket and shut the video off on the phone. I called 911. I reported what I found. I told him I would wait at the house and was armed, but would leave my weapon on the steps. I went outside and sat on the steps. I removed my holster, unchambered the round, ejected the magazine, and put the round, the magazine, the gun, and the extra magazines on the top step. I sat on the bottom step. It felt cold. She hated the cold. Under my jacket and turtleneck, sweat dripped over my torso. Sitting outside, with painful grief taking over for adrenaline, the cold was exacerbated. The heat inside the house had felt stifling. The stress of finding someone I cared about murdered, searching inside an unfamiliar home at the risk of confronting the killer, had raised my internal temperatures to a boil. Now I felt cold, weakened by my grief, and powerless over the situation. She was gone. I wanted her back. I wanted her breathing and happy. I wanted to help her. I heard sirens. I realized I was breathing too fast, feeling the initial panic of loss. I can't deal with this right now. I inhaled slowly to gain control. Somebody would pay. Somebody would fucking pay. The relief of the anger removed the cold and the grief. He better hope the cops got him before I did. What I'd like to do now is to give the excerpts don't really give away too much of the plot, so you're going to have to buy the book. One case I thought about often happened a few years ago, a divorce case where the judge wanted joint custody. That made the judge's job much easier. A trial meant work. The layman's version of the story is we were hired because the father thought there was abuse. Drug tests provided overwhelming evidence that the mother endangered the child, but the judge never considered anything but joint custody. He appointed a law guardian and held a hearing. Visitation was supervised for a while, then unsupervised on the application of the mother's attorney, and the law guardian concurred. That was followed by splitting the child's visits between the mother and the father. The mother hired an expert and sought help. The law guardian agreed with her attorney. Every time, my client's attorney fought like hell. The judge told him to settle it, because if it goes, he told him, I'll rule shared custody. The case lingered for a while the judge punished the father for making him work. Sometimes they force settlements that way, schedule a trial over the course of a long period of time, then threaten and intimidate the parties off the record. The money flows and then usually dries up. The father had shared with me that his son had told the law guardian, "Mommy yells at me, she hits me, Mommy sleeps all day. Mommy talks funny sometimes and cries." Law guardians in New York were supposed to be independent counsel for the children. They were appointed in cases of allegations of abuse or neglect. Great idea, but then the law changed, forcing them to advocate for the wishes of the child. Maybe not a great idea. What 10-year-old kid wants to do his homework instead of watching television? There was supposed to be rules as to what to do if the kid was like that, but no one seemed to have a handle on it. The judge eventually ruled shared custody, and my client's lawyer had started the appeal. The child was residing with his mother. A few days after the ruling, the mother was driving with the child. She was drunk and on Xanax. She bumped the curb and hit a pole. The Italian sports car the woman had bought for herself as a present after the divorce, when it hit the curb, it was 2 feet off the ground before it hit the pole. The car disintegrated. They scraped what was left of the kid up with a putty knife. When the father came to see me, I saw his punch coming from a mile away, but didn't move out of the way. He was big and he was strong, but he didn't know how to throw a good punch. When it hit me, it rocked me back, like being hit with a club, and he opened up an old cut I had over my left eye. I heard that dull thud you hear when you get hit, and felt the heat and disorientation normally accompanying that kind of an impact. I felt the warmth of my blood as it flowed down my face. My hands balled up instinctively, but I kept them at my sides. He cried and kept yelling at me I didn't save his son. The guys in the office all moved on him, but I waved them off. After he hit me, he stopped yelling, and the rage was replaced by a deep, soul-crushing grief. He fell into me weeping. I put my arms around his shoulders. His tears and my blood mingled on the front of my shirt. For a long time, his body jerked with uncontrollable sobs. A few days later, he returned to pay me the money he owed me, but I told him I didn't want it. He asked me to give it to a charity for abused children. He apologized and then fell quiet. No tears, no anger, just a chasm of sadness. He told me that he knew I did everything I could, but I wasn't so sure. I couldn't think of anything else I could have done, but I felt I missed something. Later that week, he killed both the judge and the law guardian. He killed the law guardian at his home in the morning. He knew he couldn't get the gun past the metal detectors at court, so he waited in the area where the judges parked their cars. The judge recovered, sort of, and retired from the bench. I heard they gave him a standing ovation at his retirement dinner. He died 3 months later. People still talk about him as though he were a hero. Okay, so those are the 2 excerpts from the book. When I write, did a contracting business, we had 2 inches of paperwork and forensic reports that said the father was a bad person. The child should not be around the father. Yet the judge kept saying, well, the father has to have access to his kids. And he was dead set on giving this guy unsupervised visitation with his child. And the week before he did, the guy wrecked his car and almost killed himself. The judge had no choice, because he was then convicted of drunk driving, not to give him the child unsupervised. But that was what was going to happen. When it comes to the system and divorce court and family court, if you haven't been involved in it, you're lucky. What I find is that once people are involved in it, they're sort of dumbstruck as to how it can be as bad as it is. Unfortunately, it's a roll of the dice. You know, your first roll of the dice is, do you get a decent attorney, or do you listen to your neighbor who had his cousin's brother do his divorce, and because there was no kids and no property, it was a 1, 2, 3 divorce, and anybody could do that. And then your second role of the dice is, who does your spouse get as an attorney? Or the other side, if not your spouse. Your third roll of the dice is the judge. There are some great judges in this state, okay? But does anybody here know how you become a judge for the most part? Anyone?
Elected or appointed?
Well, there's 2 ways of doing it, for the most part. And again, there are some very good judges. You basically grease a you grease some sort of party boss and you run for judge. Or you grease a party boss and Bill de Blasio makes you a judge. That's how you get the judge. I don't care about stuff like that when it comes to car accidents, all right? Us as adults, if we have an action in the legal system and we don't do that well, we can get past that. In a custody case, for example, where the children are being abused, if the judge makes the wrong decision, the children are sent home as a trophy to the party that's abusing them. It's a different thing. Should I zoom in? Q&A? Okay. Well, let me just ask a real quick question. Anybody watch The Walking Dead? Show of hands. All right. All right. So this is a scenario that I have spoken of often. Imagine, like with the war on drugs, for example. You know how the politicians will all show up with the opioid crisis. They'll get their pictures in the paper, and then nothing will change, right? Imagine there was this creature, okay, and it fed off of children. And what it does is it feeds off of children, and it basically ruins them. And say 1 out of 5, 1 out of 6, the child will eventually turn into a creature like this. And say this was happening in a very widespread area. Now, if that scenario happens, don't you think that there would be all kinds of politicians screaming about it, that we'd all be yelling at them to do something about it? Well, guess what? That's exactly what's happening. We have children that are being abused, trafficked, raped, emotionally abused to the point where they can no longer function as when they become adults. And we are so lacking in child protection that this continues on. Anybody that's worried about crime, the factor that ties violent criminals together is almost certainly they have suffered abuse as children. That's a good friend of mine, Andrew Vax, a very accomplished writer, wrote in the 70s a novel about somebody walking into a school and laying waste to it and killing all the kids. This was 15 years before Columbine. And that was because he observed what happened to children when they were state raised or they were left in homes where they should have been taken out. Very simple equation. Child protection equals crime prevention.
So we can take some questions now.
I think so, sure.
Anybody like to ask a question?
I don't want to ask a question, I just want to say that you both sound really interesting.
Thank you.
Your presentation.
And no matter what he tells you, I eat more steak than he does.
Got another question?
Sure.
Yeah. And then a third one also.
What do you recommend to help this change? What you described about the children and children's protection agencies? Because there is ACS, there are various agencies, there are social workers. What do you think could be different with that?
Very good question. We just had a mayoral election last year. Anybody see child abuse as one of the platforms?
Nope.
There was a national election before that. Anybody see either presidential candidate talk about child abuse?
Not really.
What we have to do, see, here's the biggest problem. Children don't vote. So what we have to do is make politicians understand that we care about our children and we want them to do something about it. Everybody, I mean, this is going to date some of us, but anybody remember Lisa Steinberg back in the 80s? Beautiful little girl beaten to death by the piece of shit that illegally adopted her. Pardon my language.
On 10th Street.
Okay, it was in the news every day for 6 months, this beautiful child who was beaten to death by this monster. And everybody said, this is never going to happen again, it's going to stop. And now we hear about kids getting beaten to death all the time, don't we?
Yep.
You can't tell me it hasn't happened so long ago that you can't remember one. We have to make them understand that we care and we want real measures. There was a whole big Child Victims Act thing that happened, all right? New York has an absurd statute of 23 as the age that you can bring an action against someone for having molested you, or they can be prosecuted by it. 23 is absurd. The person could still be living with the abuser at that point. Then it kind of went the other way, and they don't want a statute of limitations at all. So I don't want an already non-working, slow as molasses in the wintertime legal system dealing with cases that somebody's a 90-year-old in a nursing home getting sued by a 70-year-old for something that might have happened 65 years ago. That's absurd too. What we need is good common sense changes. There's an organization called the Legislative Drafting Institute for Child Protection. They're a team of experts, and what they will do is draft laws for politicians that don't have loopholes, like Megan's Law, biggest joke on the planet. Everybody know Megan's Law, the sex offender registry? You know what that is? That is, here's this thing that derives pleasure from raping and brutalizing children. We should put it away for life so it can never hurt children again, but we're not gonna. But that's okay, because when it gets out, we're gonna tell you where it lives. We're not gonna make sure that it's where it says it lives, but we're gonna tell you where it lives anyway, so it'll all be okay. And by the way, one thing I want to make a comment about is I am absolutely for child protection, but I am also for due process, okay? The legal system doesn't always work, but it's what we have at the moment. I call your attention to a news article 2 days ago where 2 men were arrested in Mexico for misdemeanor crimes. Word got around the town that they had molested children, which was a lie. The cops were overpowered, they were dragged from the jail, and they were immolated in public square. And it turns out they never touched a child. Guilt by accusation doesn't work. What works are better investigators who can better determine what has happened during a crime, or if there was a crime committed. That is what happens. But you cannot just point your finger at someone and say guilty and that's it. You know, then we're back in the old days where, oh shit, she drowned. I guess she wasn't a witch. Next question. Anybody?
So please give John Curley a round of applause. John Curley's book is being sold at the cash register. He will be to your left signing books in front of the Barnes & Noble sign.
May I?
Yes.
I also have the pleasure of appearing in Aces magazine for their literary supplement. I should be in Switchblade magazine. That's a good name, isn't it? Switchblade magazine in Canada. They're going to run my short stories. And as anyone that does wish to purchase a book today, I have a preview of the following novel for you that you can take as well.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Please give